Welcome everyone to another weekend edition of our clinic online. Uh, I guess it's the only time we ever do this, but weekend edition. We're here today with some incredible painters. Matt Klos is our presenter today, and Erin Raedeke is going to be doing the opening for And I want to remind everyone that in 2 weeks we have the Art Clinic Online figure painting forum with some incredible painters, Brian Kadakis, Nicole M. Santiago, and Susan O'Neill. I think they actually might all be from Virginia now I think about it. So a lot of Virginians, but that was by accident, to be honest. This event is being sponsored by Montgomery Art Association by kind of three figurative painters talking about their experience working from the model as the muse, all sorts of questions that I will try my best to moderate, but it should be a lot of fun. And I invite you all to join us and hear from these three incredible artists and yeah, just having a great time with us. So it's great to be part of Montgomery Art Association's kind of contributing yearly contribution to our program. So we're very grateful from them. Erin actually was our presenter last year, and unfortunately, when I was when she was the presenter, I was in Mexico on a beach, and it was really glorious. And now I'm uh, introducing Erin when it's cold and starting to snow here in Maryland. So I kind of wish I was in Mexico, but anyway, Erin is an incredible painter, and if you haven't seen her art clinic online art discussion, I encourage you to go back into our archives and check that out. It was really quite special. And before I introduce or pass the torch to Erin, I do want to say thank you to all our sponsors who have been kind of doing small chips of donations periodically to the Glen Echo Park Partnership with us as the kind of the dedication, because that money comes straight to us, and then we're able to give that straight to artists in the DC, Maryland, and Virginia area. So thanks to all of you who are contributing to the program. We couldn't do it without you. But without further ado, I will pass the torch to Erin. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Jordan. And I have to say, I do remember the palm trees in your background. I think it was a cold day here too. But anyway, I'm happy to introduce Matt Klos. He's an amazing painter, a dear friend of mine, and someone I like to poke fun at a lot. But he takes it quite well. But anyway, he has lots of amazing credentials, I think, very impressive. He got his MFA at the University of Maryland and his BFA at the Columbus College of Art and Design. He's received many awards, including the Elizabeth Greenshields Foundation grant and a number, is it 3 or 4 of the Maryland, the individual artist awards of the Maryland State Arts Council. Anyway, it's
4. Yeah, just
yeah,
4.
okay. That's what I thought. Your website says 3.
Uh-oh.
Anyway, it's okay. He's also been, as I think many of us know, in the area, the Bethesda Painting Awards. He was one of the first place winners, I believe. And so anyway, that's I think we can all say that was quite a feat. But he's a member of the Zeuxis collective, and what else? You teach at Anne Arundel Community College for how many years now is it? It's been quite a long time.
This is year 18. Yeah, it's my one full-time gig.
Okay. No, excellent teacher. He's been guest lecturers at, a lot of places, just a few to name, New York Academy of Art, Boston University, College of William and Mary. I think you were a critic at Mount Gretna as well, which is a great place up in Pennsylvania. And yeah, there's many other things, but is that good, Matt?
That's too much, Erin. Thank you.
No, he's fantastic, and I'm excited to see your talk. So
terrific. Well, thanks for the warm welcome, everyone. Thanks for getting out of bed this morning, this chilly morning. Of course, it is almost 11, right? So we got to be up by now. I'm just going to bring up the presentation here. I wanted to run through just a ton of images. I'm going to sort of throw the book at you, and we've got a little bit of an intimate group, so it's not a huge group. I don't know how Jordan and Mariana feel about this, but I would be okay with questions as we go. But yeah, so thanks for the really warm welcome, and I'll start moving here. So yeah, so Erin mentioned that I'm at AACC. It has been Anne Arundel Community College. Been there for quite a long time. But my journey began at Columbus College of Art and Design years ago. And I always like to start with these first three paintings, which I really believe it's like my senior year in undergrad. And I really believe these first three paintings are sort of the beginning of my mature work. So it was a long time ago. I mean, I was maybe 20 at this time, and 21. So I did these three paintings, and I was working on a lot of things as a student in undergraduate, sort of training at Columbus College of Art and Design. And it's a college that's known for like illustration. But I was coming up on my senior thesis show and I was doing these kind of like multi-figure paintings that just weren't really hitting home. And I lived in this house with a bunch of other guys from the college with virtually no furniture. You know, we'd get a couple coffee tables from the thrift store, a couple couches, but it was essentially just this open house. And I was really interested in sort of like these empty rooms, the dichotomy of light, like exterior, interior light. So, kind of moving forward, after sort of creating this work, I really decided to sort of like push off my graduation for a year. So I talked to the money guy at the college and I said, hey, can I defer and have my thesis next year? And it was really, not advice that, was, like everyone around me was advising me to, just finish up, get your undergraduate degree, move on. And I just really felt like, no, this is what I need to do. So I rented this apartment. This is actually a window in this apartment right downtown. We'd actually, this was sort of like a known house that was near, or kind of apartment building right near the college that was definitely like low income. So I rented this place and I would use the college's library. This is around the time that I sort of was first stumbled upon artists like Antonio Lopez Garcia. So, I would just use, that time that I had off of college, because I took that semester off. I'd wake up in the morning, work on my paintings. I'd go to the library for a chunk of the day, come back and just work on my paintings some more. Some of the things like that last painting is quite small format, which for me seems to be, kind of like my strike zone. That's, the 8 by 10, 11 by 14 range is something that comes easily to me, naturally to me. This painting is much larger. It's almost 5 feet wide, by 3 feet high. I always work on small format and large format paintings. It's just been the way that I've worked over the years. They feel like, you can go into the studio and work, but they feel like very different experiences. So it's almost like you're working on something without the fatigue, because it always feels a little new, just the process. So I'm always working on larger and smaller pieces. At this time, I was very much interested in this idea of, again, this sort of interior space and exterior space. Yeah, always interested in this sort of idea of, especially in these window paintings, this idea of like, when is the view almost unadulterated? When is it sort of obscured? What is the light doing to that obscurity? As the day would move on, right, the sun would glint on all of this, dirt or whatever on the outside of these windows, and the obscurity would kind of increase or decrease depending on the moment. And that's always been the thing that gets me excited about painting, is being in front of the motif and the differences that occur in that circumstance, and this sort of creative choices that you're making in that sort of back and forth. And this is something, Erin and I are part of this group, Perceptual Painters. And that's kind of the shared thing, is that we all really, it's not that we won't work with a photographic reference from time to time, but we really love the idea of sort of being in the world, working from a living motif. I mean, sure, it's still life, but there's always sort of this action that's occurring, in these human spaces, or just these natural spaces, and you're sort of editing and choosing. It's like those like choose your own adventure novels that I used to read when I was 14, and I love those things. This is, again, in that apartment, and you can see the painting on the left. I was working on this for maybe a month. And at the end of the day, towards the end of the process, I was cleaning up my palette one evening after dinner, and I was like, oh my gosh, really, this is the thing that excites me about this scene. And this painting, this smaller little painting on the right, maybe came together in, 3 nights or something like that. And that's actually the reason, like so much going back to that perceptual painting idea, so much of working in front of the motif, it's really, I'm sort of a slow train. Ideas come through the process. My best ideas come later, which is why residencies are so kind of, I've been on a few, I love them, but it's not until I'm packing up to go home that I'm like, oh, I know what I want to do now. Okay, so here I am at University of Maryland. It's where I went to graduate school, and I was just getting really interested in that sort of observation and what I would call this sort of like the unity with the subject, and this particular painting, Red Light, Green Light, it was about the cast of these different lights. Maybe hard to, see that in this slide, I'm not sure, but the light on the right was kind of a warmer light, and the light on the left was a little cooler. So it's really about kind of getting into this sort of micro fractal sense of color. This is kind of a counterpart to that painting. So I'd sort of, University of Maryland for me, that time in grad school was really, I think like most artists, it's really an incredible time. You can really dedicate yourself to the craft. And for me, I would sort of, I'd work a little bit during the day, but it was mostly like research. I might do some studies, spend a lot of time in the library looking at stuff. I'd go exercise at the gym. And then in the evenings, when everyone was leaving, the studios, I would sort of, don't tell them that, but I would sleep under the table in my studio. I know people did this, right? But I would just stay all night. So I would work till like 3, 4, 5 in the morning, and then, kind of sleep under the table for a few hours before people started coming in. I'm sure everyone knew that I essentially lived in the studio, but I felt like a rebel at the time. And I was doing lots of experiments with substrates, different surfaces. I tended to, I just get down to work on a panel and then realize later, like, you know what, I'm going to add this, 2-inch little section at the bottom of that panel. It just felt like this highlight that was on the floor was a little too uncomfortably close to the lower parameter, the lower edge of that panel, that painting. So then I added this on, and it felt like it was a much better solution. And I would do that a lot. So here's a painting. I was working on this figure painting for quite some time, really trying to get a figure to integrate into a space. And let's see, I think I might have some. Yeah. So here was the figure. This is actually my wife. At the time she was a close friend, but she was modeling for me, and I was trying to get that figure to integrate into the space. So I added these other panels on it. And then finally one night she was sick, and couldn't come model. And that's when I painted her out and added in this skeleton. So she still hates this painting. I still have this painting, but I hide it in the basement. Okay, and I was also interested in ideas of, again, this is maybe Antonio Lopez Garcia, but it's, other artists like Gideon Bach, Ewan Uglow, the idea of sort of almost creating, and this comes from Cezanne, right? This idea of like multiple vantage points in the same painting, threading things together. So in the microwave painting, I'm sort of looking out at these microwaves in a grad studio. I'm also looking down at the chair. You can kind of see the back of the refrigerator on the left-hand side. And, those lines are, obviously not going to connect at any point, but it really is about sort of finding cone of vision, multiple cones of vision in the same image and trying to thread that together. Antonio Lopez Garcia's one of his most famous paintings that's in an American collection. Gosh, what's it called? Sink and Mirror. And it's at the MFA in Boston. But you can actually see there's that odd little shelf underneath the sink. That's not really a shelf at all, right? It's actually a visual break in the illusion that he's sort of using to thread together the two pieces. So that's always interested me in terms of image making. More quiet studio interiors. This is a drawing. I tend to do some drawings, but I don't do a lot of them. I do my drawing with paint. So whenever I'm, working on a painting, I actually use my brush, spend some time drawing. I feel like in painting, I'm never done drawing. It's not until the last session that I might make an adjustment on an edge or a correction somewhere. So I don't do a lot of careful drawing before I get into the paintings.
Do you do any preliminary sketches or anything like that, or just jump right in?
Yeah, I just jump right in, and I jump right in typically with like a little bit of thinner into the paint, and I'll work. Sometimes I work on an untoned substrate. Sometimes it is toned, with a color, and I'll sort of work against that color or work with that color. I don't really like straight edges much. I like to sort of find my edge through different colors on either side of it. So if there's a straight line, I like to sort of find it. There's something that when I use straight edges, there are times that I don't really pay as close attention to sort of what I would call just the edge quality or the line weight as much. So I like to sort of build those edges. That way I'm much more kind of aware of, I don't know, just edges of like pressure or edges of softness. This particular painting, this was the last painting I did at that time. There was this abstract painting in this other studio, this really obnoxious sort of yellow, almost fluorescent. So what I wanted to do was sort of keep that color at bay, way in that far space. And what it required in the painting was to bring everything up to a certain level of saturation, like I would call it like mid-chrome or mid-saturated. So every time I saw a little bit of a gray blue, I would just make it blue, So it really, at this time, and I would say even today, I'm really trying to bring up more of just a color sensitivity, a quality of color into my work, which is one of the great things about working with Erin. She is a colorist. And at this time in my life, I was in Columbus, Ohio. That's where I went to undergrad. It was the only place that I could find employment, doing what I love. So I was in the classroom teaching painting, making maybe $10,000 a year. It was a tough time. My wife was working as a designer for the Attorney General's office, whose idea of creative freedom was like, well, you can use one color in addition to black. So she was ready to die. I was ready to die. We were newly married. But I made all of these happy little, pictures during that time. They sort of seem happy, but we were desperate and depressed in a little Cape Cod house in Columbus, Ohio. And I was, I don't know what else to tell you about these paintings. I'm interested in, I'm always looking at artists and, contemporary artists and, artists that have been long dead. I mean, Vuillard's always been someone that I'm really passionate about. And you can see, sort of like the panel showing through. Twachtman is another artist that just is really a beautiful, beautiful American impressionist that many of you may know. And he was always so good at, sort of dancing around the substrate, the color of the substrate. Gwen John, that Welsh painter that many of you know, is another one. So, just a steady diet of these different artists that inspire me, my gang of artists. My dad gave me his golf clubs and I was like, I don't know what to do with those. So I painted them. And then, I've really sort of enjoyed, doing these kitchen paintings over the years. Um, uh, I think, what is it? When I'm painting things like here's one thing to maybe talk about. So this overturned glass here that is in the cabinet, I really want my paintings to look like seeing, like I don't, it's so much of what I'm doing. I might block in the painting in, I don't know, in an hour, in a couple hours, but I would say 98% of the painting is sort of kind of tweaking those kind of big shape or those big color categories into something that's just right, the phenomena of sight. So that overturned kind of glass, you know, uh, pint glass, right, that's there, the way that it's sort of almost consumed by the shadow and these other areas in that cabinet, that's the whole point of the painting, right? And it does take some time, I mean, that's kind of what I'm after, and that might take, weeks to finally get it to settle in just right. So to look like seeing is something that's quite important in the work. All of this work tends to be really kind of, I don't know, autobiographical in a way that's probably not obvious, that may or may not kind of come across to the viewer. This particular painting, it's called Watched Pot. This was like during Bush era politics, in Columbus, Ohio, which is actually, you may know, it's a pretty purple area. It's a pretty political area. Happens to be an important area in presidential elections, the state of Ohio. So I'm listening to a lot of NPR and I'm talking to my brothers who are wildly successful professionals. And I'm thinking about how I'm failing every day, in Columbus, Ohio. It just wasn't working out there. And I just sort of paying attention to the news. So NPR would be playing. I've got this saucepan on the stove, this pot that's heating up. The idea of the watch pot, just paying attention as if that's going to somehow make a difference. I'm interested in really kind of low light phenomenon, at times, these sort of almost contrastless spaces. I remember one time hearing a talk by Ernie Saniga, E.M. Saniga, really beautiful painter. And he said, when you're looking at the world, you've got the sun and you've got the black of the darkest cave. In paint, the best you have is white and black. And he's like, and I like to take it even further. I like to paint right in here. That idea of like a very low contrast range. So there are times I get really excited about sort of creating these sort of low contrast spaces, sort of like this painting. In this painting, I was experimenting with metallics to kind of create the interior exterior. I'm always sort of playing with ideas about that, like creating the interior exterior. This is a group of paintings that I did, a drawing and a painting that really have to do with like, provision. I did, I got this job, we moved out to Columbus so I could work part-time as a part-time professor. And then it did manifest into getting the job that I have now, which has been an incredible, just provision for us and our family. And this is actually, I made this painting. This is all sort of, it was one-to-one measurement. So I actually stood in front of the cabinet and would kind of measure these things and measure it right over to the panel. This is the only painting I ever really made this way, but it was sort of interesting to do. I love the frontality of this design, which I've sort of taken into some of the garage paintings that I've done more recently. This is my idea of doing the dishes, My wife's like, do the dishes. And again, back in Maryland, I was working on a number of these, interior spaces. We were doing some renovations in the house. But before we did, we had this beautiful chamber stove that was in a number of was a motif in a number of these paintings. This is a painting, in the mornings I'd sort of wake up and be preparing for the day, and it was kind of like a quiet moment before anyone else woke up. And there was this idea about, I just remember the phenomena of like, when does the light outside overtake the light of the interior? And there's a sort of moment of transition between the two, like where, the interior is lit up and the outside is dark. And then it starts to get to this like periwinkle, and it gets lighter and lighter. And then at some point, right, it's lighter outside than it is with that sort of cool amber light that warm amber light on the interior. And I was just sort of meditating on that. So a lot of these ideas, I guess, are sort of from, maybe hours and hours. And I do worry a little bit about this with my own children, because we're no longer churchgoers. But when I grew up Catholic, I spent a lot of time just like sitting in a meditative state, like you couldn't move, you couldn't really fidget. I'm a high energy person, and it was suffering, but there was a certain point in those experiences growing up where I think I did sort of understand, there's something about that quiet time, and you're thinking spiritual thing, whatever it is, there is sort of an inner life or a meditative life that I definitely developed, which of course now is my painting. I think Balthus said, I don't know how you feel about Balthus. I shouldn't mention Balthus, but he said, my paintings are my prayers, which I think is sort of an interesting idea. There is something about these paintings that really are meditative, and just being in a space. It's about that meditation. Okay, this was my ode to Fairfield Porter. I was doing actually I want to take a pulse check. We're about 15 minutes in. How y'all doing? Any questions so far?
It's going great, Matt, and it's really inspiring to see some of these paintings are new.
Good. All right. So I was up till now, I had never really done much in terms of, I would paint outside, but it was sort of like, I'm doing a studio painting outside, and it might take me a couple weeks, and I might wait for the right type of light and try to go back to it. But then I went to this, I worked with an fantastic artist named Sharon Yates, who was a longtime professor at MICA, and she would take these groups up to Canada. She had this connection up there. So I was a professor at this time, and we had funds through the college. So I was like, well, I'm just going to go paint for a couple weeks with Sharon Yates. And it was an incredible experience. I remember doing this painting. This was day one. And she came up behind me and she said, "You're not Neil Riley, And Neil was an artist that I worked with in undergrad, who I just think, to this day, is like one of my favorite painters. And it really got under my skin, So I was like thinking about, I was thinking about that all day. I was sort of grumpy at dinner, And the next day I went out, and they have these red ants. If you go to St. Andrews, they're like fire ants, and they'll like, if you go to the wrong spot, they will attack you and bite you and sting you. So I went to the wrong spot the next day, and I was still angry. And I sat in this beautiful sort of place in the pines right next to Passamaquoddy Bay, and I was being bitten by ants. And I almost packed it up, but I'm like, no, dang it, I'm just gonna knock out this painting in a couple hours or whatever. And
Matt, I
I was
literally
using
did the same exact thing in the same exact spot with the same exact teacher, and I had ants on my legs. Literally the same thing happened to me. Go
yeah.
ahead.
And so Jordan, what I discovered is that if you kill the ants, if you kill enough of them, what they start doing is they start carrying off their own dead. They eat their own carcasses, and then they leave you alone because you're like not new anymore. They're like, oh, this might be a tree limb. So I just stuck it out, and knocked out this painting. And it was the only painting I'd ever made sort of like this, where, like, for example, this area over here, these sort of brownish reds, this was laid down with a palette knife. And then it was kind of scraped up with the palette knife. And then I troweled in, some kind of wet slurries of violet gray. And I was like, all right, I want to I'm going to paint quickly, forget about the drawing. I'm going to draw as I paint. And it was really transformative. Like, here's an example of one night after dinner. One painting, two paintings, three paintings. That was after dinner. So I was doing like 8 paintings a day. And I was just really, so Sharon said something to me that, it just hit the right way. I needed to hear, okay, that's cool. We know you can do this. What else? And it was just good for me. It was like a growing experience. I did go and do a number of residencies after that when my family was still quite young. I just had a couple kids at home that were pretty young. This was like a 5-week residency in France. And then I realized, okay, no more residencies. I have a family. I want to keep things together. So now I don't do them, but I do go out and do week-long workshops with my collaborator, Erin. So I'm still getting away every once in a while. But just this ethic, this way of painting, again, it's a way to work that for me was quite different. And just beautiful experiences. Some people like to go golf, or they go out fishing, or I like to get out into nature, and I like to paint. So it's been really great. And these are I'm showing you kind of various places. This is actually all France. I went to it's called the Klos, Alfred and Trafford Klos residency program through MICA that they no longer do, unfortunately. This is out in the Shenandoah, a couple, and every time I'm going away, it's an opportunity to really get inspired, because I'm working, I'll set up these trips with other artists I admire, and it's just unbelievably fulfilling to do that, to sort of get out there with your gang. Like this particular, in the Shenandoah, I met with Erin, a really fantastic Louisville, Kentucky-based artist. This is out at my close friend Tim Conti and Victoria Barnes's place in Italy, on Montecuto in Umbria. A number of these. This was actually out with Tim Conti in Arizona. And this is in the neighborhood. So this is near me and Bethlehem Steel, when it was still actually making steel about 10 years ago. So, okay, so I want to show you what I would consider kind of like the current body of work that's continuing. I moved into this house. It's sort of like in the shadow of the steel mill in a working class community. In fact, my house was owned by someone, the only one on the street who didn't work for the steel mill, was a postal worker. But everyone around here, worked for the steel mill. It was an incredibly sort of fraught relationship, between these workers and, the company. I mean, this was the company that would kill your father and your uncle. They would die because of that work. But at the same time, this is the company that made them, the middle class, actually gave them high-paying jobs. A lot of these families moved up from West Virginia. This is not my story. I grew up with a white-collar dad living up in the suburbs in upstate New York. But it was maybe 1 or 2 steps removed from me and from my upbringing. I see it as sort of like a part of Americana that is pretty ubiquitous, and not always necessarily. But moving here, it's been interesting just to sort of raise my own kids in this area and, and hear these stories, hear this history. So a lot of my work is kind of about that. It's not really nostalgia. It's more about understanding the social and kind of political dynamics of, working class and sort of new white collar workers, the children of the working class that are now our contemporary white collar workers. So a lot of the work deals with that. I mean, sometimes I'll paint things that I don't even know what these objects were, and there is sort of interesting to look at. So I think sometimes when I think about painting and drawing, I think about approaching something with, almost like that Buddhist concept of beginner's mind. Take everything you know about something and put it on the shelf and just look at this thing in front of you to like truly be present. And it's really helped me to deal with a lot of these things that I don't even know what these things are or what they were used for. Maybe it's the first time I've seen one of these tools in my life. And in some ways, it kind of helps me get into that sort of beginner's mind. But there is a utilitarian aspect to them. They were used for something. These things sort of, to me, they represent sort of like a DIY ethic, which I believe in. It's like, hey, you want to build a house, get a shovel, start digging the foundation. I love that idea. It's a little naive, but
Can I ask you a question, Matt?
sure.
I think it's important to note that, I mean, because these are all in your basement where your studio is, and this is a house you kind of inherited, right?
Hmm.
And that speaks to kind of this almost an archaeological dig with what was left in the house, correct?
That's right. Yeah, so I'm discovering things that are really, they really are. My wife's family grew up, she actually grew up in Bel Air, Maryland, but their family is from, like, her dad grew up in the house that we're in now. So there is a sense of like, oh, this wasn't, Albert's house. This was Albert's dad's house. And he was like a DIY person, it's like a postman. He had a side company selling insurance, but he would like fit, all these like little additions on the place he'd put together with sort of reclaimed scrap from the steel yard, which of course causes problems today, but it's kind of cool. So, and one of the stories, I guess, in this community as well, a way that I kind of learned a different dimension to the community is that there are all the VA hospital that's now down in Baltimore Center. Gosh, I forget the name of the facility now. It used to be stationed out in Sparrows Point, and there are these incredible homes out here, right on the water, that were fixed up actually in 1979, the year I was born. They were all kind of built up and re-roofed and re-windowed and repainted. And then because of this sort of stalemate between the federal government, the state, and the county, essentially, they were just left abandoned. So they put all this money into it and then decided, it's going to make a lot more sense to have the VA hospital in the city instead of out here, just in terms of access. So these houses just laid fallow. I mean, they were left alone. And, osprey nests would crop up, kids would go in and smoke a joint. Some of these things burned down, but I actually had an opportunity. This was about 8 years ago, where I went and I did a project where I documented all of these structures, just painted all of these structures. Was really interested in some different artists, de Kooning's like Door to the River, that sort of more expressive, sort of color notes. I was painting with like a 2-inch brush on some of these. I mean, I would get into some line work, but much more painterly, much more open, fast, something that I don't normally do at this scale. So I did a whole series of these paintings, and 2 feet, these are 2 feet square. This one's 4 feet square. And then, those ideas sort of trickled back into the interior. So after that year, I kind of thought, well, I don't really know how that works into the rest of my work. But I started doing these paintings as interiors too. When I brought them in and was framing them and working on them to present, they kind of became this interesting architectural structure within the structure of the interior. So I did a series of these paintings that were sort of based on the paintings in situ. Okay, I'm kind of jumping over a bunch. Sorry, speeding up. Just doing a bunch of I guess that what I'm talking about here is sort of like I really do love, and hopefully this is coming through, but I'm absolutely fascinated by just design, the rectangle. Like I love the puzzle of, you know, all these little elliptical objects within the sort of the frame of the space, you know. So I, so I'm constantly thinking about that and enjoying that. There are a few years ago, I've done about 50 of these small abstractions. And a few years ago, I took this administrative job that was, you know, it was a good opportunity for the family. And it was about 10 months. It almost killed me. But what I would do is at night, I would, you know, just to feel alive, you know, I would take like an hour and just make these little abstractions. And I would give myself little rules like, oh, like each touch has to, you know, every time I go back with that light gray, I've got to move the color a little bit. You know, so I'm not saying these are like great paintings, but it was a way to stay alive at a time in my life where I felt pretty disconnected with the studio practice, you know, which I think is important for us as artists. I mean, for me, I do all my own framing, which is a creative aesthetic endeavor. And you know, so sometimes you're not painting, but as long as you're doing something, and maybe it's even just going with a friend to see a show. I mean, that, you know, just do something. And maybe it's not every day, but do your best. I know what it's like to have a professional job, have a family, all those other requirements, but just stay alive, you know, in the arts in some way, and keep your gang about you. So these are just a series of abstractions, kind of culled out from that group of 50 or 60 paintings that I did. And you know, and in interesting ways, it manifested into my other, you know, what I would call kind of main work, where, you know, I sort of did this painting that was just a collection of little motifs. They all kind of relate in terms of eye level, you know, but they were just little snapshots around the studio where I was working of different little objects and elements within the space. You know, I was sort of affected by that infinity mirror show. So just a number of these interiors, and I'm about to get into my last project, and then I'll open it up for Q&A if anyone has any. Where is that? It's coming up, I promise. A couple more still lifes and interiors. I did say I was going to throw the book at you all, so that's what I did. Okay,
When
here
you
we
over
are.
promote slides.
So this last project is really, I've been working on, I guess it's been almost 3 years now, but I was working on a whole series of these alley paintings around my house. And I was sort of like tracing a path between my alley and this historically black owned community. It's a landlocked community that's about, you know, less than a quarter mile from my house. So sort of like just interested in kind of like the world that we, you know, the version of ourselves that we show the world, and the version of ourselves that's actually quite visible that we actually don't really intend to show the world, right? So I'm being a little voyeuristic here, and just sort of being a little bit of a social scientist, you know, just sort of looking and recording, thinking about histories, thinking about the way that people and populations shift, thinking about neighborliness, who are we? And actually, it was such a terrific time. I mean, there's obviously when I would get out of the car and paint one, you know, and set up to paint one of these paintings. You know, you'd get some funny looks, or you'd get people coming out to be like, "Hey, hi," you know, especially as I got further away from the house and people didn't really know me. But it's amazing how generous people are, and it was such a great project. And I've shown it a number of places now. Actually, this is I'm super excited to share with all of you that I'll be showing this project along with some other work in Incheon, South Korea, this summer. So I'm super excited about there's a museum show coming up for me that I've been stressing about. But it'll be nice to sort of show a slice of my neighborhood to folks that live in neighborhoods, you know, probably with some similarities to my own on the other side of the globe. It's going to be super cool. So that is the talk. So thanks for tuning in.
That was awesome. There's an incredible amount of paintings. We'll have to kind of go back and kind of pause the computer to see these. Where can we see them in person? Like if we were to want to see the brushwork and the textures of your paintings in person.
Yeah, I mean, great question. So I do for this particular area of the world, I do, studio visits anytime, every time anyone asks, and I show a good bit around the region. I just had a show come down that was up at Williston Northampton School in Massachusetts, but I don't have a gallery that's local. So yeah, good question.
And I noticed in the paintings that you kind of are starting to bow your like a kind of a Rackstraw Downs or a Lopez Garcia kind of perspective bow. Is that conscious, or are you planning this ahead of time, or is it kind of a natural thing that just happens in your paintings?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say it's both of those things. I mean, it's a conscious choice to rely on a sort of a measured, sort of optical response to the space, especially when when you're working from life. So Peter Van Dyke is another one. Gideon Bach. I mean, different artists that are really like playing with that phenomenon of vision. So for me, it's conscious to use a process that creates that sort of bending perspective. And there actually have been times in recent years that I'm like, I'll decide at the outset of the work, do I want this to be very much about this close measured space, which gives you a bending perspective, or do I want it to be more about that formal play up against the rectangle, the picture plane? So it's sort of, I'm now at a place where I'm sort of picking and choosing between the two processes.
I could go through it again. I will watch the video when it's done. But it's so wonderful, your sensibility about the small spaces and the inner and outer world. I'm fascinated by that. And then how it differs when you actually paint a scene like a house it's even a very, I would almost not say that it's the same person doing it. It's parts of your brain are processing things a little bit differently, and I love to see it. I love particularly the houses. I'm fascinated by houses. I would love to see your barrio, your neighborhood paintings. So do you have them at home now, or when are they going to Korea?
They ship out the first week of May, so I've got some time to pack things up, and I'm working on a couple large canvases for it, which is really exciting. But the smaller work is done, which is nice. So.
Yeah. And the larger is also houses, or
There are one that I'm working on is actually the Key Bridge collapse. So they're not all, yeah. So some are landscape and some are interior. So I have a large interior that I just finished. But yeah, I like what you said about it almost feels like it's by a different artist because it is a different. I'm definitely am thinking of very different things. I mean, I think maybe they look like the same hand,
oh,
um,
sure.
but
I didn't mean that you broke your style.
yeah, no, but I really do see them as very different bodies of work. So it's hard for me to kind of find connections between the two, which is sometimes the real challenge.
But it's wonderful to see how your brain functions into different situations. I love that. And when you teach, what do you prefer to focus on? And of course, you've been teaching so much and to so many different audiences also. So do you have a preferred way to sort of bring people into painting, undergraduates, if you teach undergraduates too?
Yeah, I mean, I find that it's really helpful for all students, all painting students, to sort of grapple with sort of the visible world, understand, because when you're trying to like paint perceptually based on what's in front of you, it requires quite a lot, a little understanding of drawing, the F word for shortening, right? People, freshmen hate foreshortening. So you're grappling with that. You're also trying to get to We all have different color sensibilities, but there is a real share. Like that's sort of like a yellow based orange. It's relatively light. So just to get that level of awareness, painting awareness, working perceptually is kind of where I always begin. And then students start to develop their own voice, and I just sort of get to the pleasure of seeing where they go. It's amazing.
Wow. And when you guys teach together, for example, in a foreign country, are you focusing on the gorgeous surroundings probably and during the day and then doing some interior stuff at night, or how do you
It's like
compose?
you've been with us. It's like
Yeah,
you've come. You got to
I
come with
want to.
us.
I want to, you can
You
tell.
got to do it. But so Erin will sometimes we mostly split up the day. So it'll be she'll teach half the day, I'll teach half the day. But we'll do quite often. Erin will do a portrait demonstration at some point. I'll do an interior demonstration. We had a nocturne challenge. We had a competition. Yeah, a nocturne challenge one night.
That
Uh,
one.
yeah, I was gonna say that the jury's still out. We don't know who won that.
Between your students and you guys?
Yeah, anybody that wanted to participate, and some people just collapse into bed after dinner because we're there to work. We make a lot of great paintings and see a lot of stuff.
That's wonderful. And you guys always use oil in your travels, even though it doesn't dry right away and so on? Or do you tend to use other media too?
We had an artist with us using watercolor last year. Some people use acrylic. Primarily, people use oil, and yeah.
When you're kind of, I have a question about scale and that you're working with. When you're working, yeah, I know you said your sweet spot's kind of like 9 by 11 or 9 by 14, whatever you said. And I notice also like the scaling up to much larger canvases, but you're still kind of doing still life in the same, feel to it. Do you find that you have to adjust to the size of your canvas and things like brushwork or texture to kind of compensate for a smaller setting? Or do you feel like you change as an artist depending on the size of your surface? Does that make sense? What I'm asking?
I think it does. I think what so if I'm hearing the question correctly, you're asking if when I scale up, am I doing different things
Yeah,
to
is the
get to
process
it? Yeah.
changing for you, or is it just always going to be like it's whatever is in front of me or however it works?
Yeah, so let's see. When I'm dealing with scale, what I try to do, when I talk about how the smaller scale is sort of in my strike zone, I sort of believe this is true. I think of a lot of painters and I think of a lot of students that I've had where there's some of my students just paint big. They have trouble going under 16 by 24. It's just hard for them to and then I have other students that have trouble going up to like 11 by 14. Like they just want to do a 5 by 7. So what I mean there is that like I am natively a small painter. It just makes sense to me, intimate scale. I get into the picture, and it's easy for me to articulate these super sharp, delicate edges. When I'm painting large, so I love paintings that have a large presence or a small presence, depending on the image, depending on what I'm after. And when I approach them both, I try to approach them in the same way, actually. So when I'm working on a larger painting, like the interior that I just finished, that's 5 feet by 3.5 feet, it was laid in one session. I covered the canvas, but I used a 3-inch brush, and like a palette knife that was maybe, I don't know, maybe a 4-inch palette knife. So I'm actually approaching them in the same way. For me, it's less of a sort of a native expression to work with quantities of paint at scale. Where like someone like Wolf Kahn, actually, I've seen Erin. Erin she paints with a kind of a quantity of paint that it just doesn't come natural to me. So that's all I mean. But really the processes are pretty different. I think when I'm working at the larger scale, it does become a little more difficult to when I went to go see the Ocean Park series by his incredible Corn's incredible show at the Corcoran. This was maybe like 20 years ago, the best show I've seen in my life. He had, I remember one particular painting, this like 2.5 foot by 2.5 foot spot of orange in this incredible canvas, and there was this leak of like green into it, you know. And for me, it just would be hard to leave that. It was perfect in his painting, you know what I'm saying? But when I'm working on these larger paintings, that is the real challenge for me, is to understand how much of a level of sort of refinement to bring to that larger canvas. So yeah, I mean, I could talk about scale all day. I
Yeah, I
love
guess like a follow-up question is like, when people are looking at a painting that's large, you have a distance between you and the canvas, and smaller, you have a much shorter distance between you and the surface. And I was wondering how you thought about when you're painting, do you think about the viewer's experience as well? Like the distance between a surface and person. Does that come across during your process at all?
Absolutely, and that's the real tension I was trying to describe, is like, especially in the bigger work, is like, okay, how much is enough in terms of the read, you know, like where you want to be, or do I really want to unpack this area so that maybe this is the area of the canvas that you come up to and you continue to dig into it visually.
And I guess the other question I have is how much do you edit, or do you edit out any objects? Like if you were in your basement, for instance, you're doing an archaeological dig. I love that term, by the way. It was excellent. But like that, do you say, "Oh, I can't have that composition. It's just going to throw the paint off," or you said, "No, just maybe hide it in some darker tones or something like that." Do you kind of go through those processes?
Yeah, absolutely. There's edits. There's a larger interior that I was working on with, like, there's like an American flag, and there was this vise in there, and that vise actually came after the painting was done. I felt like that lower left quadrant was empty, so I sort of lugged this big vise that was in my basement into that area. So there is some additions or deletions that occur. Maybe more so in recent years. I've felt more liberty to be like, I don't know about that, you know, where before I feel like I was much more into the recording of what was there.
Yeah.
I have another question. Do you ever paint from photographs?
You know, I don't. And I did years ago. I did before any of these slides that I showed you today. I think the reason is because I am, you know, my best ideas occur to me in time, and the photograph seems to be, you know, there are the artists that are like, hey, this is what I want to do, and they execute it. I'm not that way. I'm like this Cezanne, you know, like, oh, I have a feeling about this mountain out here. Not sure what it is, so I'm just going to paint it 200 times, you know.
So in your intimate portraits of the archaeological dig, you wouldn't take a picture of all the jars and have it.
No, because I would, you know, I can see myself sitting in the studio next to that picture in front of the canvas and then just watching Instagram reels for 3 hours. You know what I'm saying? Because I know that that photograph is going to be there completely unchanged. When I lug everything out of the studio on site in front of that archaeological, you know, whatever it is, whatever I want to look at, I know the clock is ticking. I mean, I got to make dinner in 3 hours. You know, you know what I'm saying? And I'm out there, I might as well. So,
Can I ask a question? I'm wary of time, but well, okay. Thank you. That was amazing. And I feel like I could ask you 8 million questions. So one, I'd be curious when you are deciding to get like real measury, how you're doing that, if you can describe your system for that. Two, one thought is that I thought you were this like very meticulous woodworker, or I know you make your own frames, but just from all of those your basement paintings, I had this like total contrived notion of who you were as a human. So that was very like a fun discovery. And then, okay, so I have one question I'm going to ask, two other things. And then this summer I was in Madrid and I saw I don't
oh, she's
pronounce,
so terrific. Isabel Quintanilla. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. I would like have butchered the last name, but that show blew my mind. And after, yeah, anyway, okay, I'll let you talk more.
She's incredible. So because we know each other now, I'm hoping you'll mail me a copy of that book. Um, that's incredible. I can't believe I didn't even know there was a show. Where were you, Madrid?
Yeah, it was at the again, not gonna pronounce the name. It's like the Typhon. It's like Thyssen. There was a retrospective.
Okay.
It's
All right. Well, I'm gonna get
Thyssen dash BORNEMISZA.
wow. Yeah, I can't pronounce that either. But okay, good to know that that exists because I will
It's
get that.
yeah, it was a like life-changing show.
Yeah, she is she's the best. I mean, one of the, she and Antonio Lopez Garcia. She's like Antonio Lopez Garcia, but with like supercharged color. Um, but yeah, so process, so real quick answer on process. I mean, I just measure, so I'm sort of like in the painting that I just finished. So there are no grid lines. I'm not really interested in grid lines on these smaller alley paintings that I've been doing. I just do like a little X and I find a vertical and a horizontal. But again, that's not measuring. It's more like mapping the quadrants of the surface. So like, where do I want to put the garage that I'm painting? In the interiors, when the bending happens, it really is about you're finding, when you look at a straight wall, and I know you know this in your work. I mean, I know your work. When you're looking at that straight wall, and you're looking straight at it, it's a horizontal, like where the wall meets the ceiling. There's a horizontal line. But if you start to look off to the right, then it's descending towards a vanishing point to the right. If you start to look to the left, it's descending to a vanishing point to the left. So it's absolutely true, that sort of visual phenomenon. The only way to square that to the illusion that you're making on a flat picture plane is to essentially bend the wall, right? So it's just through measurement. It's through a close, scrupulous understanding of the space. It's just truth, right? So that's the process, just measuring everything. And you had another question that I forgot.
No, I don't think so. I mean, yes, I could ask you many, many, many ones, but I'm trying to be respectful that this is not a one-on-one conversation.
Other questions before we call the day? Well, I want to thank our host, Erin, for being the great host that you were and introducing Matt today. And Matt, thank you again for
Thank you.
an incredible barrage of paintings. I hope these are all up somewhere like your webpage where we can check them out. And
Yeah. Check out just mattklos.com. I'll put it in the chat
there's
here.
also and there's a link to his webpage and also to the trip that he and Erin are doing in England on Matt's ACO page. So however you got to the video link today, you can also have the link from there as well. So check out his work in person if you can. Maybe send an email and say, "Hey, I want to come to your studio.
Yeah.
I'll bring coffee." I don't know.
Yeah,
But
coffee gets you in the door. Yep.
but thank you again.
People are writing in the chat that they loved it. Dawn had to leave early, but she loved it, and several other people have said the same thing. How much they appreciate you.
Well, thanks so much. Yeah, thanks for hosting me. And if folks have questions too, I mean, just drop me an email. I mean, I'm still, email's my, mode of communication. So just shoot me a note.
Wonderful.
Thanks again, and also we'll see you in 2 weeks for the Art Clinic Online figure painting or figure painters forum. I don't really know what title we gave it, but we have some really incredible artists coming up. More of a conversational thing, I think, about just what it's like working with a model, and it'll be really great. We have, with 3 incredible artists. So we'll see you in 2 weeks, everyone.
Have a great time. Thank you so much. It was wonderful.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.